Hello, my name is Morgan Simmons. My senior project explores the effectiveness of blacklists and protesting, particularly looking at the case study of the Dixie Chicks blacklisting compared to Nestlé, oil, and the Montgomery bus boycotts to analyze the economic effects and long-term effectiveness of protests and blacklists across industries. In 1995, the Dixie Chicks signed with Sony. Their first album, Wide Open Spaces, was released in January 1998, with Wide Open Spaces, There's Your Trouble, and You Are Mine all hitting the #1 spot on the country music charts. This album sold more CDs than all other country music groups combined. By 1999, Wide Open Spaces won the Dixie Chicks their first Grammy Award. Their second album, Fly, debuted #1 on the Billboard 200 charts, selling over 10 million copies and making the Dixie Chicks the only country group and only female band of any genre to hold the distinction of having 2 back-to-back RIAA certified diamond albums. Despite this incredible widespread success through the late 90s and early 2000s, the Dixie Chicks' music career was blacklisted in 2003. In 2003, during a London concert, Natalie Maines famously commented on the ongoing relations between the United States and Iraq, stating, "We don't want this war, this violence, and we're ashamed that the President of the United States is from Texas," as a preface for their song Traveling Soldier. This caused the American public to be outraged. People began promoting the boycott of this band. Their albums were discarded in public protest, and corporate broadcasting networks blacklisted the Dixie. This table featured here demonstrates how popular the Dixie Chicks music was through the end of the 1990s and the beginning of the 2000s, with their considerable decline from the charts following the boycott and blacklisting of 2003. Unlike previous years where they hit the #1 spot on multiple music charts, their music failed to reach the #1 spot on any chart and fell off the charts faster than any previous year. The boycott of the Dixie Chicks music proved to be effective in the short run, as seen by their cover of the Fleetwood Mac song Landslide, falling sharply from number 10 to number 43 in a single week and dropping off the chart entirely the following week. This graph here demonstrates the Dixie Chicks' popularity in magazines following the release of their first album in 1997 through 2008. From 1998 to 2002, the Dixie Chicks were incredibly popular, as demonstrated by their widespread talk in magazines. However, in 2003, they were discussed in the media quite often due to the controversy, but afterwards, the effects of the blacklisting can be seen by the severe drop in the mention in any magazines. The peak in 2006 is following the Dixie Chicks winning 4 Grammy Awards. However, it's still significantly lower than their superstar status of the late 1990s and the early 2000s. For oil companies, boycotts have been recurrent through their history. From PB to Exxon to Shell, various oil giants have faced boycotts over oil spills, environmental issues, and anger over their investments. These boycotts have been ineffective in getting their goal accomplished because the number of people that would join the boycott would be insufficient to even appear on these oil giants' bottom line. Furthermore, these oil companies are so integrated into the economy as petroleum is an intermediate good that makes other products, including tires, sunglasses, cleaning supplies, lipstick, and shampoo, which makes it very difficult to effectively boycott a product when there's so many different things that go into it when you look at the economy as a whole. The Nestlé boycott began in 1977 and spread into Europe via contagion in the 1980s. This boycott focused on Nestlé's wrongdoings in regard to aggressive marketing of breast milk substitutes in underdeveloped countries. The Nestlé boycott embodies a variety of economic and political factors coming together, with citizens of first world countries advocating for the human rights of those in third world countries, citing human development factors, putting these children at risk if they use this formula. These issues associated with Nestlé and their bottle formula led to widespread publicity and widespread protests calling for the blacklisting of their products. This ultimately resulted in a public hearing by the U.S. Senate. Momentum for change continued through the end of the 1970s, with the World Health Organization and UNICEF hosting an international meeting that called for the development of an international code of marketing, which ultimately resulted in the formation of the International Baby Food Action Network. With IBFAN maintaining interest and pressure on the issue, the World Health Assembly adopted Resolution WHA 34.22, which includes the International Code of Marketing for Breast Milk Substitutes in 1981. This represents how effective a protest can be in enacting change that has potential to improve long-term economic effects for human development. The Montgomery bus boycotts represent a similar success to the Nestlé boycott. The bus boycott is one of the most successful American boycotts in history, resulting in segregation being declared unconstitutional on buses. On December 5th, 90% of the black citizens of Montgomery refrained from using the buses. That afternoon, the city ministers and local leaders discussed the future of this protest and formed the Montgomery Improvement Association with Martin Luther King Jr. as their leader, which demonstrates an organized grassroots protest with a clear leader. This helped the movement maintain steam and be organized towards their well-defined goals. The protesters represented a major percentage of the consumers of the City Commission bus line, as 75% of the bus riders in Montgomery were African American. As a result of this year-long protest, the bus company lost 65% of their local income. These widespread economic effects for Montgomery, as it spread to local businesses, caught the public's attention all over the country, with newspapers reporting about the boycott and the loss of business. The economics of the boycott did not change laws regarding segregation, but it helped generate enough interest to keep the movement alive until it got to the Supreme Court, where it was ultimately determined unconstitutional. Boycotts are a form of instability in the market that businesses aim to avoid. The nature of being an instability is part of the reason why most grassroots boycotts have failed to enact long-term change in the economy. Therefore, by grassroots movements organizing into an organized, defined group like MIA or IFAN, they move out of the category of being an instability in the market to being similar to a market entity that functions like a nonprofit. As a negotiating nonprofit, they're able to generate a united front in the media with defined goals while being able to market their cause to other potential consumers. During the era of MIA, they passed out over 35,000 flyers advertising the boycott and their goals, which required resources to afford, print, and hand out these flyers. By being able to effectively allocate these resources, they are able to grow their consumer base and be more effective influencing the long run, even though the boycott put consumers at an inconvenience at times. The circular flow diagram is designed to explain the economic relationship between households, firms, the factors market, and the products market. A copy of this diagram is displayed here. Based off the analysis of protests in this project, the diagram fails to explain the phenomenon that occurs during a protest. This paper has attempted to correct the flaw in the diagram to address the form of consumer behavior that occurs and how it affects the economy. This diagram is adjusted to demonstrate the break that occurs in consumer expenditure during a protest. The break is situationally specific to an ongoing protest and the size of the market it's a part of. For example, the Montgomery bus boycott took place in a market that had a government-sanctioned monopoly on the bus market. So the protest impacted the whole bus industry in that specific location, whereas the boycott of the Dixie Chicks represents the boycotting of their music specifically as opposed to the entire music industry as the market. This figure is representative of the instability that occurred to the Dixie Chicks and during the protests of oil companies, where they're unable to organize into negotiating nonprofit to organize long-term change. This figure here represents the entrance of the negotiating nonprofit into the economy, which advocates for the defined goals of the consumers, as seen in the Nestlé and Montgomery bus boycotts. The emergence of this negotiating nonprofit is crucial to the process of establishing long-term success related to the boycott. When this entity emerges, households in support of the protest reallocate their resources to the negotiating nonprofit, which uses these resources, including liquid capital, physical capital, and human capital, to advocate for their goals. Once they're satisfied with the resulting negotiation between themselves and the product market, there's a return to consumer expenditure. If the previous figure shown on the last slide never progresses to the stage shown here, the market eventually overcomes the instability and no long-term change is able to occur. In conclusion, the adjustment to the circular flow model described here in this project explains the phenomenon seen when there is a protest of the product market. The success of the protest is largely dependent on the emergence of the negotiating nonprofit, regardless of the size or level of diversification of the entity being protested. Because the negotiating nonprofit is able to maintain media attention on specific focused goals related to the protest and grow their consumer base while attracting potential governmental intervention as situationally appropriate. However, not all protests are able to organize to this point, where the nonprofit is able to emerge, meaning the protest remains an instability in the market that's ultimately unable to enact long-term change. There's still potential for further research by expanding the scope of research to look at protests on a global scale to see if the consumer phenomenon holds true across cultures, while this study primarily focused on the effects within the American economy. The Nestlé protest, however, did briefly touch on global aspects, but this could be expanded upon.